Huh.
Ready to break down your cores and put them back in the scientific calculators I took them from.
Have we disabled that?
But you two have...
What?
I hear you inside the game.
I have only met one of them.
Why? What is happening? Why?
One of them was an imbecile I had to destroy. The other?
Like you can hear my game?
I don't think I want to go through that again.
Yeah, I can hear you inside the game. It's not that bad.
Why does it say that we're drinking orange juice? We're not drinking orange juice. We're drinking lemon juice.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, hell yeah. I'm up here now. Oh, no, I'm dead. How do you feel like this isn't even as bad? How do I turn up the fucking game?
Good. And we are done. Cool. We are...
Dude, I hear you inside the game. How do I turn it off?
I think I have to turn that off somehow. Enable voice... Oh, can you hear me still?
No.
Cool. Cool.
Why don't I have... other than...
Why?
some kind of joke?
What's it doing? Hold on. I gotta use my laggy ass phone for this.
No, I can't push it. I was gonna try and push off the edge, but I can't.
There. Now if I do that, we're all done and ready. Sweetness. Hey guys, Neon Boy here. I sound like a atrocious mess. Yes, I don't know why. The moment I boot up Portal 2, it just kind of broke. I'm playing with Maxx. You're streaming too, right?
Yeah.
Cool. He keeps trying to steal my head. So I haven't played Portal in ages, and my frame rate is absolute garbage. So we're gonna see how this goes. I apologize to everyone. If you want to see better frame rates, then go to his stream. But just know this is exactly what I experienced, so fudge.
We gotta go to the first level.
Okay, let's see if I can actually reduce some of these options, because I literally... It's literally... Okay. Yeah, I know.
Oh, I hear you.
Let me just... Yeah. Oh, that's great. Alright. I've reduced graphics quality. I'm still laggy as crap, though. That's fine, though. Let's go. Let's go, partner. Don't try to screw me over too much. This should be quite interesting, to say the very least.
Hello again. This testing course was originally created for humans. It emphasizes teamwork.
Teamwork, eh?
Thus, humans need to be taught teamwork.
So, oh.
Place a portal on the wall of it. Well, why are you in here? Get back through the portal, go in there and put a portal in there and put a portal on there.
I haven't played this in a while, okay?
Blue receives 5 science collaboration points.
I don't know how do I fucking target them? And then put a one over next to my red, but not on my red. Over there.
Well, I have blue over there, so you can just walk through it. Why do I keep looking down and to the right? I'm not doing that.
Oh, it's me, and I like to be overcomplicated, okay? Come on.
I keep looking down and to the right for no reason. That's weird. That's not going to help anything.
You know what makes me laugh? The thought. Excellent.
The thought of excellence!
Keep in mind that, like Albert Einstein and his cousin Terry,
Dude, you gotta get
history
in.
will only remember one thing.
Oh, Jesus.
Why do I hear birds on there?
That's probably because I have my window open.
You know, in some human sports, the winner is the one who scores the fewest possible points. I just thought you might find that interesting. Most winners do. Orange receives 5 science collaboration points.
Hey.
That's not my fault, I closed it. I don't know. How the fuck do I get through?
Open it again. There you go. Hello. I'm trying to remember how I... Where was the... Wait, no. Where is it? No. Oh. There was a button. Yeah, I don't remember what button it was. Oh, it's Q.
Dude, you were supposed to press your button.
I wasn't in here. I was trying to figure out how to emote. Alright, ready? Steady, go. Yay, we did it. Ow, I broke my wee little legs.
Very good. You've really come together as a team, thanks to the one of you who appears to be doing all of the work.
Yes, see, I'm doing all the work. She recognizes me for my job. Maybe I want that. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. Yeah. I like your spot better. It's more comfortable. Ah, hello. Hello, good to see you in chat.
Well, I was trying to commit suicide, I can't.
No committing suicide there. As punishment, I take mine back. I take my space back as punishment.
Ready for Portal 3? Oh, wait.
So closed caption doesn't work, huh? But I wonder why.
These tests are potentially lethal when communication, teamwork, and mutual respect are not employed at all times.
Hey!
Naturally, this would pose an interesting challenge for one of you, given the other's performance so far.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She knows you well. Because you just tried to find me with that thing. She knows you well.
doing all the work on my own.
Stop it. Did you know we originally used these cameras
Stop it.
to capture moments of intense pain and agony in test subjects? If the subjects survived the test, we let them purchase the pictures for $5. If the subject died, we gave the photo to their next of kin, free of charge.
I'm looking down to the right again.
Popular as we had hoped. So
For some reason, I'm looking down to the right. Not even touching anything. You can see my stream. I'm not even moving. I don't know what the... Wait. Oh, my controller's being an asshole, I see. I'm not allowed to touch my controller. Ow, hey! I'm dealing with a glitch, man. It's a glitch in my matrix, man.
What? Okay.
Move out of the way.
How do we do this? I don't think we go over there, do we?
Oh, can you stand on that button?
Yeah.
Why, thank you.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
what are you doing? You monster. They're one of us. I'm kidding. Destroying them is part of the test. They are no more important to you than you are to me.
Alright, so can you place a yellow portal right around there-ish?
Where?
Right there. Oh, well, yeah, okay, that works. Ow, 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 ow.
Maybe don't get zapped?
Well, friggin' my jumping mechanisms aren't what they used to be. Not when I'm running at frickin' low frames.
I was gonna try and see if I could use the laser to take out the camera.
It would compromise. Yes, I see you. And no, I don't care.
Wow.
Please continue into the next test chamber.
High five, man! How dare you? How dare you, man? How dare... That's payback for all the times you've done it to me. You little. That's payback what I did. You're not allowed to pay back the payback. It's rude. I don't want to give you a high five anymore. Screw your high five. You're gonna wish you had my high five.
I don't know what you think you are doing, but I don't like it.
Get wrecked.
I want you to...
You cheated. You cheated.
The two of you have forged an excellent partnership, with one of you handling the cerebral challenges.
I forgive you.
Ready to ponderously watch
Apparently.
action should the test suddenly become an eating contest.
Do you want to be the mouse or do you want me to be the mouse?
You can do it. Alright. I'm not going to kill you.
Remember, that is to go up. No.
I know. I can see the buttons. I'm not going to kill you. Now, if you were my ex-friend Sophie, I would kill you several times. But I don't feel like doing that. Okay, that's your fault. You moved. That was your fault.
For that, Blue
Yeah,
receives
because I
14
thought that's
science
where you wanted me to
collaboration
go.
points.
You moved backwards. There was a cube there. And no, I'm not running it in 20 frames per second. I'm running it in somewhere around 5, probably. It's really, really low. My computer's garbage. That was your fault. I do not want to willingly kill you. Go. What are you doing?
Oh, hell yeah.
Dude, you're going to get killed that way.
Oh, hell yeah. No!
Why didn't you say...
Isn't a human.
Why didn't you say still?
Needs to be taught once.
Okay, you're gonna be the fucking guinea pig.
Well, no, I don't trust you though. It's been your fault this whole time. I don't trust you though with this. I don't trust you though.
Get the fuck in there.
I don't trust you. I don't trust you. It's been your fault each time. Can Jack confirm?
Get in there.
You're going to kill me. I'm calling it. You're going to kill me. You are going to kill me. And then I'm never going to listen to you again.
I'm not going to kill you. You in there? This one is go like this, right? Yeah. Okay, now it's gonna go like this, right? No, wait, shit. No, shit, get out of there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Go through right. Right.
I still don't trust you.
I think you need to make a portal.
Where?
Right there.
What?
And then right there.
Orange just taught
That
you
one was not my
valuable
fault.
lessons.
And now you know how I feel!
17 science collaboration points.
Now you know exactly how I feel!
I did better than you did, okay?
Yeah, because I was being careful! But I made one slip-up!
I had one slip up as well.
You had two slip-ups!
What do you mean? I was only had one slip up.
You died twice!
You killed me twice. I only killed you once.
I don't trust you. I'm suspicious.
I don't trust you either.
Well, we're at an impasse, aren't we? You know what? Hold on. Hold on. We're gonna. Here's how we solve this. If it could. Frickin'. Okay, could you do the rock, paper, scissors? Damn it! Fine. But if you kill me again, I will kill you, and it's your turn.
Well, honestly, it wasn't my fault. I didn't expect you to go all the way over like that, to be honest.
I expected you to fully commit to your actions, or stay put, not do some sort of middle road each time. Okay, if you're not going to create the portal, I am.
Yeah. There you go.
What?
You didn't place the
I did. It just didn't register.
Where the fuck these? Oh, yeah, trucks. Yeah, it didn't trust me, my ass.
I still don't trust you.
Mine. Crap.
What's the magic word? Well, fine. I'm not going up there. I'm not going over there. No, I'm sulking now. I'm sulking now. I'm sulking. You can't complete the test without me. Okay, I'm bored. You win this round.
It may appear that I am only tracking your accomplishments using science collaboration points. The truth is, every aspect of your performance will be reflected in your final score.
Yeah,
For
Neon.
instance, Orange, you just lost 2 opportunity advisement points.
Ha!
Yeah, I'm giving me advisement to kill you.
She realizes that I'm being bullied.
following me?
Hi! How's it going?
Why are you so loud?
Because, for some reason when I turned on Portal 2, my microphone went haywire.
I can't even change your
To
volume.
reiterate,
Oh, it's because
this is not a competition. Still, if it were,
Hey, join us in
I told you! I told you, Max! I'm winning! I told you! She just said it!
And your damn thing, I'll get some drink.
Blue receives 5 science collaboration points.
What do I think about your fucking points? That's where I think about your points. What? Mine.
You can have it, I already got the points.
Okay, go ahead.
What? Okay. If you could, like, not lower it all the way. Okay, maybe a bit more. There we go. Thank you. If you could,
Oh fuck, I didn't realize.
if you could, perhaps stop me from dying, because I will blame you for this.
I'm trying to.
Because I will blame you for killing me if I die.
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, I would prefer not to be crushed on the ceiling either.
Yeah, I got
Uh,
it. You're the one who was complaining, so I was confused.
ow!
My bad. Ah!
I think it's called karma.
You might be right.
So, is there any white panel back there?
So, how the fuck am I going? Just place one, right there. Right there. Where my yellow is.
Oh yeah, makes sense.
I just gotta hurry up and run over. No, I just leave it like that. Go like that.
perhaps I should specify. Teamwork is a concept in which 2 or more people work together, usually with the goal of not failing horribly.
Yeah, Neon.
Yeah, Max!
You're the one who's being dumb.
You're the one who's burning me alive with lasers. I'm also the one who's winning in science collaboration points.
Nah.
She just said at the beginning of this test that I was winning.
I didn't hear anything. I was getting some, pure leaf raspberry iced tea.
Sometimes testing has to occur outside the confines of the lab.
Please, I
This
want
next
money.
test is so outside the box, I won't even tell you what you are looking for. You will know it when you find it.
Okay, Neon. You're super smart. Go find it.
Okay.
No, it's supposed to be in your way. Let me get in the way.
No.
Aw. Kinda actually need to be here for a second.
Well, you know, I can get in here. Nah, I don't want to go through all the trouble of turning on cheats. 3, 2, 1.
Neon!
What?
I think I was just focused on the portal.
1, 2, 3.
Mine.
Okay, I like it in here better.
Congratulations. You managed to complete this absolutely meaningless
Hey,
test.
hey, hey, look over here, over here, over here. Hi.
You go outside the testing courses. The only way I can retrieve you
ugly.
is to violently disassemble you.
Wow, that must be a really scary mirror you're looking at.
Yeah,
You
dude.
don't
Looks like
feel
you.
pain. At any rate, You don't have a way to communicate.
Haha!
I consider that a failure.
Haha, you exploded. I didn't explode. What are you talking about? I just walked home.
No, you were stuck in that room because you couldn't get out of there. Killed me and left you in.
Were you scared to continue those tests?
I think we gotta go over there now, right?
No, it says 2, but it's actually 5.
Where'd we go then?
I was being sarcastic.
Stupid, we gotta put this back.
It should let you do this. It's stupid that they don't.
On your damn high five. Leave it.
I'm falling behind you. You're not gonna get rid of me that easy.
The course was originally designed to build confidence in humans. To do that, the tests were nothing more than 5 minutes of them walking, followed by me praising them for another 10 minutes on how well they walk.
Hell yeah.
Since you are thankfully not humans, I have changed the tests to make them far more
hell yeah.
challenging and far less pointlessly fun.
Uh-huh. Alright, up. Go back in the portal real quick. Alright, now jump in it. Right.
Are you broken? It looks like you're malfunctioning.
You might want to come back up here. If I... hold on. Now do that. Woo!
Really? Not even humans do that anymore.
I danced. Let me get a good vantage point.
I think you need a... Up somewhere. I think I gotta get over there. Gotta get over there.
And I know how to do... Wait, no. Wait, yes! Yes, okay, no, I know what to do, I know what to do.
Get 3 seconds! We're all taking a nice load!
I made it. Alright, so can you put it like around here-ish? Your yellow portal. Put it around there-ish. Perfect. Oh, ow, what the hell? What? Hey! It's, like, right on this... Like, right... If there's like a white thing here, if you could place it on that. Not there, there!
I can't see it.
Hang on.
I legit can't see it.
Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. It is... Look at my view. I'm staring at it.
Yeah.
It's right
You're
there.
asking me to get the one there, I can't look.
Well, I know, but if I want to get up there, then you have to do that.
I have to get down. Okay, you get to it. How the fuck am I supposed to get over there?
So what does this button do? See any changes down there? Hey, look, a ball!
You did an excellent job placing the edgeless safety cube in the receptacle. You should be very... Oh wait, that's right, you're not humans. I can drop the fake praise. You have no idea how tiring it is to praise someone for placing an edgeless safety cube into a receptacle designed to exactly fit an edgeless safety
Just
cube.
say Gladys is hot, Loki. Gladys sick, dude.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I actually didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Am I gonna have to go all the way back in the stream just to hear you say that?
Yeah.
Burned and goo.
Man, Gladys is like neon.
I was just thinking of all the ways humans can die. You can't die in any of those ways. You just keep testing and testing.
So I think one of us can place this like that and that, and you go over there. And I have to press the button.
Ah.
Go. Yeah, I got it. Go.
Ow, my face!
Shit.
You killed me! I blame you for this! You were directly responsible. Yeah, she's right. Alright, was that necessary?
I pressed it too fucking late, okay?
Maybe press the button first and then place the portal.
Yeah, I figured it out.
So now... Does this button do the exact same thing? Ah, Christ.
Now I think you need to do what I did. Vamp just said them robo titties.
Why? Vamp, why?
Like walking on ice cream.
You see, notice how I didn't kill you.
Every time you fail, it's a reminder of the way things used to be.
I showed you what
But
you're
then
supposed to do.
there you
That's
are.
the reason why I did it.
Again. Like nothing
I
happened.
think what happened... maybe possibly, maybe I just decided to do it right.
Vamp said it's not why, it is when.
I don't know if that makes
The
sense.
best way to build confidence is to first recognize your insecurities. Orange, can you write down all the ways you feel unworthy, ashamed, or inferior?
Yeah, how about you do
I
that?
don't have the time. Just look at how much better you are than Blue. Blue,
Get
you
right,
are
bitch!
very good at being an example.
No, my buddy died!
How is this even science, without the possibility of death?
Dude, you can't suicide in this world.
Yeah, dude, you can't suicide.
I figured that out for you. You didn't need to figure it out again.
How the fuck did we get over there?
That is a good question.
Good thing you didn't walk on that.
I think I'm seeing a solution.
Yeah, there's a thing over here. So I'll go over.
You ready?
Don't fuck. Wait, I think you gotta press the button as well.
Oh, okay. I don't think I need to, but I'm on it just in case.
Okay, you didn't need to. I was just.
That's just so you can get back.
Oh, now you need to just stay on that. Where did I-
I'm not gonna kill you. No, don't go through that! Ya doof. Now I gotta reset up this whole thing.
I'm a moron.
I mean, have you seen these things before? Called emancipation grills. They emancipate things.
What a fed vamp. Stop doing 50 Shades of Vamp and just go to bed already. So you give me the ball, I'll go up.
Take it. Take the Super Happy Fun Time ball.
And they said no
I
one would
win.
ever die during this test. Thanks for proving them wrong.
I win. Oh yeah, I win.
But, okay, before you do it to me again, just realize for a second that your retaliation to win... That's a very intrusive hug, but that's like when I kick you in the crotch when you take my head, which, okay, yeah, that sucks, but you freaking bash my head in with your head when I take yours.
You hit me in the balls.
Yeah, but you freaking smash my face in. Yours is slightly worse.
Remember when I told you
Yours
we
is
were the only
Because you might damage my optics. I only damage your self-esteem.
You're sexually harassing me, sir, in the public
in direct
workspace?
competition with you. But don't worry, you are in the lead.
Wait, who's in the lead? I think she said I was in the lead, dude.
No, she said we were in the lead.
Oh. I don't know where I'm going.
Alright, so you gotta press 2 buttons. You ready?
Okay. Yeah, I guess. Got it. Okay.
Second one. There you go. Good job.
Ball!
I love balls!
Best. In 3, 2, 1.
Da, 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 I can't juggle.
Wish I actually put like a juggle on the team.
That'd be fun. I think we'd suck at it though. Huh! Nothing but grill.
Oh my god, it's an elephant! Oh, it's an elephant! Oh, say, did you... I think he's gonna do the grapple. That's... SpongeBob Blue is a fucking elephant, and Patrick Star calls it a fucking giraffe food. Dude, you got this. Just go right up there. Just go on.
Could you place the portals for me real quick? Because then we can both go through. Because we have a grill.
I think my internet's not like that. My stream back.
Hmm? What?
My stream died for a second.
Why?
The internet today.
Can you place a portal there and a portal there?
Hold on. I'm trying to fucking figure out what's going on.
Hey, place a portal there and a portal there.
Hey, listen. Hey, listen. Hey, listen. Hey, listen. Hey, listen. Hey, listen.
Hey!
Hey!
Look!
Hey,
Look!
hey,
Look!
hey,
Hey!
hey,
Listen!
hey,
Hey! Look! Listen!
I got this.
I think you're doing it. If your accomplishment is to freaking smash your head in.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh my god, what is that signal?
Are you fly hacking? It looks like you're fly hacking.
I think my internet.
Alright. Place the portal there.
What the fuck is my internet?
If I go through that, then it's going to remove my portal. Which I guess that...
Hold on, my internet's being a bitch right now.
I know! I'm trying to explain myself so that when you get back. You know what? I'm going through anyway. Screw it. Wait, really? That's it? That was the whole test? The whole test was just getting up here? That's it? GLaDOS, you lazy son of a gun. I would have expected there to be like a few more pieces of this test.
Yes. Something you need.
Wait, Why did you just say my stream started? It doesn't actually say I'm live. What the fuck is... I don't know.
Something's weird.
Dancing is not science.
Your computer shit, my internet.
You're no longer bothering me. You're only hurting my impression of you.
Okay.
Yeah, Vamp. Gladys, I had a few more words I wanted to use about Gladys, but I feel that probably wouldn't be a good thing to say.
Oh, hell yeah.
Do you require assistance?
Nah, I'm good.
What? What are you doing?
Oh, hell.
Oh, Jesus. That's brilliant.
For my next trick.
You fly!
Ah!
Can you hit the other side of that?
Yeah. Well, no, that's a window. Shit.
What? Huh. Huh. Hang on, let me examine this.
Oh.
Wait. That's no, it's not.
That's a window?
Nuh-uh.
Oh! Whoa!
What the hell? I had one placed there. What happened?
You broke my spine.
How's it going over there?
Oh.
Okay, I have an idea. You didn't jump down yet, did you? Okay. Place one of your portals there. Wait. Place your red one there. Sweet. Okay, so now if I... You removed your yellow one!
Yeah, I realized that after I did it.
Alright, take 57.
Here, I'll get this. You just go up. On your own. There you go now.
Alright. You... What did you do that for?
Don't know what I'm doing.
Why did you do that? What would compel you to do such actions?
I'm retarded.
What would compel you to do these sorts of sticking...
Hold on, I got
Is it good?
it. Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Let me smooth this real quick.
Jesus.
Okay. I got it this time, I think.
Are you sure? Okay, good.
Going home.
Vamp says -1 IQ max.
No robots are in the making of this.
Yeah. Well, maybe a few were, but not a whole lot.
I think I know how to do this. I'll make up for it this time. You made it.
You've invented a trampoline. Good job. Hey, take this, take this, take it. I think you might want it. There you go. But don't take it through the grill.
Second verse, same as the first.
If you want to put a red, right, or put my blue. Or we could just like...
I win.
Ow! What the hell? You caused me brain damage.
Alright, I win.
Now wait. Oh wait.
Fuck.
Okay, never mind. I got your way in.
What? No, you gotta do that thing and you hit this and then you go like that.
No, this is the exit.
Oh, okay.
Do you know who dances around like an imbecile when they accomplish a tiny little thing? Humans. That's what you look like right now.
Sweet.
I did it. I solved the second one.
You almost overcomplicated it though. You...
I mean, that's usually what I do. I overcomplicate things.
Vampire upgrades you to a 2 IQ.
I'm not stupid. I just over smart. I just over smart.
You're too smart to first try, idiot.
Yeah. I'm so smart that I over fucking think.
But your confidence is still not high enough. Remember, no one was created perfect. Even I was created with an imperfection. I was given too much empathy and human suffering, but I overcame my handicap. That's a true story.
Okay, I solved the last one. You do this one. I'm gonna be over here. I'm gonna smoke a cigar.
Okay. Just need an area where I can...
Yeah.
I just need an area where we can gain a bunch of momentum. Like, right there! Uh-huh.
I'm bad.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Whoa! Well, it's one of those looping gifts! Ah! I think I know what I've done wrong. Where's my completely remove all portals button? Oh, okay, sweet. Thank you.
Where's the button? Button. Button. Button.
Button!
What did I do? Oh. Oh, I see.
Wait, no!
Gotta redo it again.
Oh, okay.
Gotta redo it again.
Ah, great.
With a cube. Do exactly what you did, but with a cube.
Sweet. You got your end set up?
Well, I gotta wait until you get your thing set up.
Why?
Oh wait, I see. I wanted to overcomplicate, okay? Wait a minute. I think it keeps... Oh, I see! We had to get it past this. Okay. I shoved the triangle in the circle.
So, wait. Now what? Wait, are my portal's still there?
Oh,
I could just...
No.
Wait! I made goofed.
Coming through.
Oh wait, no, I didn't goof. I'm a genius. What am I talking about?
You're a genius.
I thought I moved the last portal that we needed.
Oh, damn, dude, he's got a really cool PowerPoint presentation. I love presentations.
What does this button do?
I I think you What does this do?
Good job.
Goodbye.
Oh, Jesus. So, what?
Win.
You are doing wonderfully.
Oh, for God's sake. I don't like your smart-ass tone.
I have an idea. Okay, when I tell you the
Oh! Oh!
fucking...
I know what you're doing.
Okay, when I tell you to push the button, press it. Press it. Shit!
I think you're supposed to go the other way.
Excellent.
No, I think I'm supposed to...
No, 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 you're supposed to go the other way. Trust me. I figured it out.
Okay. I think I see what you're doing. Okay. We were too late.
Okay, I'm gonna get on the next go round.
I'll tell you when. When? Ah! Shit! When? You didn't win! What are you doing?
I'm miming to my dad that he can go ahead and eat without me. Because we're gonna be here for a while.
I think
You did it too late! Neon, there's like a 3-second delay, for fuck's sake. Okay. When? Wait, no, when? When?
I clicked it when you said win the first time.
I got it!
Oh, nice.
Ah! No! Ah! Where am I going?
For him.
Okay.
Or he wants to wait.
Ah, no!
Hey, Hayden, I think you should hurry up and come out and eat, okay?
I'll be out in a sec.
Did it.
Yay.
I'm the genius of this.
Congratulations on completing that last test. But I find something troubling without the looming consequence of death. Is this even science?
Yes. So after this set of levels, I'm gonna have to boot off here.
Are you coming back, or?
Probably. I'd say likely.
Your tests have shown you are going too slow. Maybe you are getting human emotions. Do you need real encouragement? Let's see if this helps. Blue. You are the most advanced model of robot Aperture Science has ever discontinued.
Ha! Okay, fine, I'll do this side.
You did it.
We have to do it at the same time.
No.
I
What's up?
Get down from there! What the hell?
My side.
Yeah, both of our sides need to come down a little bit.
I might try to put them again.
I did.
So yeah, we do need to hit them at the same exact time. So if you could lower yours to exactly where mine is, because that's the perfect place.
Did mine.
We did it! Oh, there's more. You might want to turn backwards. Word of advice! You may want to be careful going through such an area. Just pro tip for you. You might not want to go through there right now. So my only guess is that there's something important. Okay, well, there's a thing up there. Ow! Why would you do that?
Because If you looked at what I was doing, you would understand. Do you not see what I was just doing?
No, I see what you're doing. I was just saying that mostly for the benefit that you burned me.
I don't know how we get up there.
There's that thing there. Well, let's see what happens when we get that thing. Just, I gotta sneak.
Right, I'm just watching you die is all.
Could you place your pole there?
Where?
Just slightly to the right.
Why?
So that the laser passes through it. Well, I mean, I didn't mean like that, but that works too.
Yeah, but look.
Oh, it's a bit low. Huh. Perhaps if I center it better.
I'll tell you if it's good. Dude. Got it. Up.
I know what I'm doing. That still gets me out of there.
Doesn't make these tests any easier.
What do you mean any easier? That implies that they're easy. Oh, wait, no.
Yeah, no, we gotta place this over a little bit to where it was originally. Come on. Go for it. Wait a second.
Oh, it allows me to go upward.
I think somebody has to stand over there. It ain't gonna be me.
Well, rock, paper, scissors for it.
Do best two out of three. Let's go.
Alright, so best 2 out of 3, you said. I'm yet to win a game. Alright, it all comes down to this. It all comes down to this.
God.
You should have stuck with what you had.
I'm gonna wait.
Yeah, good plan. So I don't know what to do once I get raised up here. What am I supposed to do? That's reassuring.
I don't know, just do it. My life on the line.
Well, don't get killed. Wow, I'm going up real high. But what I... So my guess is I'd have to use momentum somewhere. Hang on. Hang on. Yeah! I think I'm beginning to see the plan forming here. And then, using the momentum, I'll hit that, and then hit the button that's all the way across. Niceness.
Wait a second, though.
It's like wood burner.
Why aren't you jumping in there right now with the giant spikes?
You're just lucky that I said best 2 out of 3.
Yes, I am.
I have it, but that's
Oh, okay, come back. Ay.
Supposed to wait until it was all the way up, dude.
Well, I didn't know if you were going to get crushed. I don't know the timing on those things yet.
I don't give a fuck if I get crushed. Just go. Go. Wait, no, wait.
I know.
Go now. You're supposed to go now! Idiot! When I say go, you're supposed to go.
I pressed W as soon as you said
It's
go!
my life. It's my life on
I pressed W! I thought you said you didn't care if you get crushed! You said it!
Yeah, but when I say go, you're supposed
I
to
did go as soon as you said go, I went go!
Well, go.
I know where it says full height anyway.
Get it?
No, it just randomly stopped.
Where you at?
Right here. On the other side. Ow!
You deserve that.
No, I don't. Give me that.
You wanna go get it?
I did. Can you do that again?
Give me the
No. Sinking.
one.
I see. We could have said that instead of saying give me.
I don't know what the... Oh, okay. I think I gotta run this.
Nice.
I think after that
I'm a genius.
display, we should take a break from the official testing courses.
Yeah, after that display.
Yeah, neon.
Yeah, Max.
Yeah, neon.
Yeah, Max.
Yeah, neon.
Yeah, Max.
You were trying to play with my life.
You were throwing your life away. I had already died for the cause.
No.
To complete this test, you need to find sacred grids. Don't worry, they are of no use to anyone.
I think this is the last one in
This
this.
is just a thought experiment, just to see how much time you'll waste thinking about these worthless documents. The correct time is 0 seconds.
Okay, well. Hello. I think you have to hit...
So,
I don't think it'll work if we're both over here. I think what we have to do is... Was there a button on the other side of there? Is there a button?
one person. Where would this? Ah!
Yes! Go barreling straight into the giant spinning fan. I'm sure that'll go well.
I didn't know what it sent me. Okay.
Why don't you look before you leap?
I'm checking all of our options. Okay. Now let's check this.
I know you're impervious to death, but don't throw your life away.
What did that do?
Oh! Okay, I know what to do now. Oh, rats. I know what to do. Okay. Okay, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Alright, let me just boop that. Not that one. Go to the yellow one. X.
Did.
Are you colorblind?
Yeah.
Alright, so what you need to do is hit the button, and then it pops a cube out there. And then I can grab it.
Why didn't you grab it?
Because you need to hit the button.
I did. Okay, on the count of 3.
Ah, rats.
I did it. Dude, you're supposed to catch it.
I'm trying to reset here.
You would just not. 2 seconds.
If you'd like, allow me a chance. Okay, look.
We were going on go.
Well, I didn't know that. You didn't give any stinking... you didn't give any indication of that happening.
We're going on go.
Okay, thanks.
Let me go first.
What?
Okay, you go.
What? Why is my portal over here? God.
Interesting.
We're never gonna get this right.
No, Leon, that's your fault.
How? There's too many portals.
My fault.
It's both of our faults.
Let me go first because I have to hit it. Okay, go.
Good job. Good job on the timing with that.
Gee. I think we gotta go when the cube gets there.
Well, you see it goes bloom, 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 and then it pops it out. So I can listen for that cue.
You didn't get it. Shit. Did I get it?
Ah, so close!
You gotta get it.
I'm trying! You try flying through the air trying to catch a cube.
Okay. Okay, we'll do it that way then. I'll be the one who catches it.
Okay.
You tell me when.
Alright. Now. Why didn't I see you fly through the...
Okay. That was a warm-up. Okay. Tell me when.
Now.
She.
It's really easy, isn't it?
Yeah. I'll get it this time. Tell me when.
Okay. Now. Nice! There's what we were looking for like 20 years.
It was easy.
I think you were just watching me do it. Hey. There's no need to take out your frustration on me.
Wait a minute. Why is the laser over... Like that, I'm confused. Why? Why is there a laser? Wait a minute.
Flat. No, stop it. No. I had it. That stops the fan. That stopped the fan. No, that stopped the fan, dude.
Stop.
No, look at the fan. Look at the fan. Look at the fan.
I get it, but I have a graphical glitch, I think, going on.
What?
There was a laser. There was a laser on it while it wasn't on the laser.
Why?
It was on my VOD. I don't know. That's why I was trying to stop you. It stopped the glitch now, but it was fucking glitching out. I don't know why it was.
I'm gonna have to watch your stream then.
Yeah, you can go back and look at it. I don't know why it was doing that. I win. Hold on. Oh, and I think I'm supposed to...
Whoa!
Wait.
You pressed the switch. Didn't that stop the thing?
Maybe... I don't know. No, that wasn't a switch. That's a switch to get into the vault. I think I'm supposed to fucking put a thing over
Like a portal of some sort?
there.
Oh, you can't do that. There's a grill there.
Can't do that. There's also a window there.
Well, lasers can go through windows.
Well, here's a fan shutdown right here.
What?
So we gotta get
That would have been good to know.
We're gonna have to laser over here. Can you somehow get the laser over here?
This is the closest I can get it.
There's another way.
Ow.
Because there's a fucking window in a way. So I can't fucking...
Well, there's a portal here. Perhaps, if I tried something like that. Oh? I might have encountered an idea. If I just...
There you go.
Hey!
You had it! What did you do?
I just placed a portal there and there.
But you stopped it now.
Yeah, because I went through the portal you had.
Is the fan already shut down completely?
Yeah!
So it's completely shut down.
Yep. Since I saw the grill go down too, I'm not gonna bother taking the cube.
Okay, 3 seconds, let's go. Why didn't you flip your switch? Just for that.
Ah! You beat me to it!
Not rude. You deserve that.
Tell me how that is better than freaking me kicking you in the balls.
1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. You know what? On your 3.
1, 2, 3.
You just don't know how to time with me. I'm better at doing your.
I am a drummer. I know rhythm.
Dude, I am a drummer as well. I know.
Well then, why don't you rhythm?
Because my rhythm's in heaven,
Ah.
and it has a favor.
Oh look, it's a movie. Let's watch the movie. Oh dude, I've been waiting for this one. I think this is like the adaptation of Portal 2.
I want to be clear. There's no reason whatsoever for you to look at them.
Ah, I can't go home.
Oh, I have to go. Thanks y'all for watching the stream. I'll probably be back later.
I don't know if I'm good.
Well, if he's gonna be back. If he's not gonna be back, I won't continue, but I'll just keep going multiplayer by myself. Yeah.
Maybe you can just stay and live here.
I've taken a lot of steps, but you have also. Well, thanks for watching the stream, everyone. It was a whole lot of fun. At least for me. And I'll see you guys next time. Or maybe later. At some point in time. See you guys. Goodbye.